Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I was working as a cashier at this little supermarket on 5th Street. Now, this isn't one of those fancy mega marts you see with a bazillion aisles and a parking lot the size of a small country. Nah, it was your typical neighborhood supermarket, the kind where you'd find folks shopping for dinner or kids picking up candy after school. My usual shift ran from the afternoon until late evening. That day, like any other Tuesday, I spent hours behind my register, bagging groceries, making small talk with customers, handling cash, all the routine stuff you'd expect. Towards the end of the shift, the hustle and bustle of the supermarket would usually die down. The store would get quieter, and the customers would get fewer and farther between. I'd take that time to tidy up my workspace, straightening out the magazines and candies that the kids often left in disarray. I'd count the cash in the register, making sure it tallied up with the receipts, and list down any discrepancies for the manager to check later. Once I finished up, I'd usually chat a bit with the janitor, a cool older guy named Mike with the best stories about his time in the Navy. That day, he was mopping up near the canned goods, his brows furrowed in concentration. Mike gave me a nod as I made my way to the time clock, my signal to punch out. Normally, at this time, there'd still be a few people milling about, buying last-minute items, maybe grabbing a snack for a late-night movie. But that night, the supermarket was practically empty. Even my manager, the one who's always there till the bitter end, just waved me off and disappeared into the back office. I remember shrugging into my jacket and stepping out into the parking lot. This lot, usually buzzing with cars and people, looked pretty deserted that night. I remember the streetlight flickering overhead, its faint hum the only sound in the still night. It was like something straight out of a low-budget horror flick. I mean, come on, a flickering light in a deserted lot late at night. I couldn't help but shake my head and laugh a little at the cliche. But then there it was, that uneasy feeling. It hit me as I started my walk home, a route so familiar I could probably walk it blindfolded. I've always liked the walk. Past the old park that held a million childhood memories, the 24-hour diner that served the best greasy burgers in town, and then the rows of quaint white picket fence houses leading to my own place. But on that night, everything felt different. The park seemed darker, its empty swings moving slightly in the chilly wind, casting eerie shadows on the sand below. The diner, usually inviting with its warm lights and the delicious smell of coffee, was dark. As for the houses, their cheery charm seemed to have faded, replaced with a haunting stillness. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me, a chill running down my spine. It was late, the streets were pretty much deserted, and I was just thinking about getting some shut-eye after a long day. It was chilly out, and all I wanted to do was hit the sack. Then, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. You know, it was dark, I was alone, and my mind was probably just making stuff up. I even stopped walking to check if it was just an echo or something, but the sound stopped when I did, and started again when I started walking. That's when I realized somebody was following me. I won't lie, my heart was racing like a sprinter on steroids. Every time I heard the crunch of gravel behind me, my skin prickled and fear ran down my spine. It was like being in one of those horror movies, except this was real life, and I had no idea how it was going to end. It wasn't just the sound that freaked me out, though. It was a feeling, like highs burning into my back. It's hard to explain, but it was like I could feel his gaze on me, watching my every move. It was creepy as hell. I was fumbling for my keys, my hands shaking like crazy. You know how in the movies, they always drop the keys when they're scared. Yeah, that's not just a movie thing. Anyway, I managed to unlock the door and was just about to step inside when I felt him. He was right behind me. The guy I've been trying to ignore to pretend wasn't there was now so close I could feel his breath on my neck. Man, I can't tell you how freaked out I was. It was like every one of my nightmares coming true at once. I wasn't just going to let him in, though. I turned around, and we were face to face. He was a lot bigger than me, and those cold, emotionless eyes of his sent chills down my spine. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I don't know where I got the strength from. Maybe it was the adrenaline or something, but I pushed him. Kicked, screamed, did everything I could to get him away from me. After what felt like forever, I finally got free and darted inside, slamming the door behind me. I was shaking so bad, I could barely get the deadbolt in place. There were a couple more thumps on the door, and then it was quiet, like deafeningly quiet. I remember sinking to the floor, my back against the door, trying to catch my breath. My heart was beating so fast, I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I managed to get my phone out and dial the cops. Honestly, I was so scared I could barely talk, but the person on the other end was really calm, and they promised to send the police over. I don't know how long I sat there, waiting for the cops to come. It felt like hours, but it was probably just a few minutes. When they finally arrived, the creep was gone. Vanished like he'd never been there. The cops were really nice, asked me a bunch of questions, looked around the place, but there was no sign of the guy. No evidence, nothing. It was like I'd imagined the whole thing, but I knew what happened. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. And just like that, my quiet, boring Tuesday night turned into a story I'd never forget. So I was at this bash on a Friday night once. One of those typical parties with crazy strobe lights, music blasting so loud it makes your head spin. I'm more of a chill at home kind of person, but my buddies were all, come on, it'll be a blast. I gave in, hoping I could get a bit of that fun they were so hyped about. The party was alright, I guess. This wasn't just any old party. It was one of those bashes that you hear about for weeks beforehand. My friends had been buzzing about it for ages, so when Friday night rolled around, the hype was through the roof. The place was packed. People from all walks of life were there, from the jocks and cheerleaders to the nerds and goths. It was like a mishmash of every high school clique you could think of. The music was so loud, you could feel the bass vibrating through the floor. And the lights? They were flashing in all directions, casting a weird glow on everyone and everything. You know that saying, eat, drink, and be merry. Well, that was the motto for the night. There were snacks and drinks scattered around on every available surface. Some people were dancing, their bodies swaying to the beat. Others were huddled in corners, talking and laughing. I thought, all right, it's time to split. I waved my friends goodbye and headed out. The moment I stepped outside, it was like entering a different world. It was quiet, save for the distant hum of the city, and the chilly night air was a sharp contrast to the heat of the party. So there I was, stepping out of the chaos of the party into the silent streets. I spotted a cab idling a little way off, and I quickly headed towards it. It was pretty cold, and I was looking forward to the warmth of the taxi. I got in, settled down, and gave the driver my address. Then I leaned back, just staring out the window, watching the city lights blur by. Everything was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the loud party I had just left. But then the driver started asking questions. At first, they were the usual ones, like, busy night? Or where are you coming from? I responded politely, assuming he was just trying to make some conversation. However, the questions quickly started to get a bit too personal. He asked about my job, if I lived alone, even about my family. I remember the cold sweat trickling down my back as he continued prying. Each question felt more intrusive than the last, and a knot of unease formed in my stomach. It was then that I glanced at the dashboard and noticed the unfamiliar logo of the taxi company. Panic surged through me. How had I not noticed it earlier? I remember thinking, this isn't right. I'm in the wrong cab. My heart started racing. I felt trapped, cornered. But I tried to remain calm on the outside, not wanting to tip the driver off about my growing fear. I responded to his questions with vague answers, trying to give away as little information as possible. The journey home felt like it took forever. Every second in that cab, with the driver's intrusive questions, was agonizing. The fear, the uncertainty, the feeling of being so vulnerable, it was a nightmare. When I finally got home, I was more than relieved. I quickly paid the fare and practically ran into my apartment. It was over, or so I thought. Little did I know that the real terror was only just beginning. The next morning, still shaken up by the cab ride, I decided to grab some groceries. The sun was shining, it was a brand new day, and I was hoping to shake it all off my shoulders. As I was walking back, I saw the same guy, the cab driver, just hanging out across the street from my building. I remember my heart just racing in my chest, but I convinced myself it was a mere coincidence. A few days later, I saw him again, this time near my office. That's when I realized this wasn't a coincidence at all. This dude was stalking me. I mean, what were the odds, right? The same dude showing up at my home and my workplace. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I won't lie, I was terrified. Then one day, I got back from work to find an envelope on my doormat with a rose. I knew instantly it was from him. The fear was so real I could taste it. I didn't even open the envelope. I just called the cops right away. They came over, took my statement, collected the letter, and promised they'd look into it. The days following were some of the most anxious I'd ever lived through, but the creepy cab driver, he was gone. Like he'd vanished into thin air. Be careful and vigilant when getting into Texas. I remember this day. It was a cold winter day in 2015, just another day at school. Now, school itself was a mix of stuff. Some things I liked, like basketball practice and hanging out with my buddies during lunch. Other things not so much, like maths, which was like trying to read an alien language. But that's how it was, typical school stuff. The bell rang, and that was my cue to leave. I remember how that sound was the best part of my day. It was like music to my ears. As I left the building, I could still hear the bustle behind me, everyone rushing out, the chatter of my classmates, the slam of lockers. I strolled down the same path I always did, my bag heavy with books and my mind wandering off to what snacks I had waiting for me at home. As I walked away from school, this van began tailing me. At first, I didn't pay it any mind. It was just a van. A little old, a little battered like 100 other vans in town. It was a shade of white that wasn't really white anymore, more like a faded gray. It had a couple of dark windows, tinted so I couldn't see inside. Again, nothing really out of the ordinary. But the further I walked, the more the van kept creeping into my mind. You know that weird gut feeling you get when something's not right? It was like that, and weirdly enough, each time I glanced over my shoulder, there it was. Every single time. No matter what corner I turned, what street I crossed, it was always there, a constant figure in my rear view. That's when I began to put it together, the pieces slowly falling into place. The van was following me. It matched my speed, turned when I turned, stopped when I stopped. It was like a shadow, mimicking my every move. Panic started creeping up on me, a cold feeling that made my stomach churn. Every beat of my heart seemed to echo that realization, louder and louder. The van is following me. My steps felt heavier, my breaths shorter. Every little sound was amplified in my ears, but the one I could hear the most was the quiet hum of the van's engine. I quickened my pace, my mind racing a mile a minute, but the van kept up. It was like this deadly game of cat and mouse. The faster I went, the faster it followed. Its presence was like a threat, an unspoken danger that set off all the alarms in my head. That's when I knew I had to do something, had to shake it off. The street ahead was deserted, and the van was still behind me. It was a terrifying moment, one that made me realize how alone I was. I needed to escape, to hide. And that's when I saw the bush by the road. It was the only place I could think of to hide, so I dove into it, trying to be as quiet as I could. I could hear the van still driving around, its engine growling like some sort of beast. Time seemed to stand still as I waited for it to leave, and then finally, the sound of the engine started to fade away. After the van drove off, I came out of the bush and started running towards my house. I ran like I never did before. I was scared, real scared. I could hear my heart in my ears and my breaths were getting shorter. I just wanted to get home. While running, everything felt spooky. Even normal stuff, like leaves moving or cars passing, freaked me out. But I didn't stop, I just kept running. I kept my eyes on my house, the place I felt safe in. Finally, I could see my house. It was the best sight in the world. I saw my mom standing at the door, but before I could say anything, I started feeling dizzy. Everything became blurry and I couldn't keep my balance. I saw my mom looking worried, but I was too out of it to say anything. Then everything started to go black. I felt I was falling into a deep sleep. I heard my mom and felt myself falling. Then I just blacked out. I was so tired and scared I just couldn't stay awake. And that was it. I was out cold, not knowing what was going to happen next. I vaguely remember my mom's panicked voice and the sensation of falling before everything went black. That's the last thing I remember before I passed out. The feeling of my mom's arms trying to catch me and then nothing. The fear, the panic, the adrenaline, they all drained out of me, and I slipped into unconsciousness, away from the terror of the day. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.